Perhaps true love doesn't begin with flowers, but with a cold contract, with inherited hurts, with a young woman given away as part of a debt that was never hers. Isabella was 25, had never been touched, and suddenly she belonged to the most feared and most wounded man in the country. He didn't want a wife, he wanted punishment. She didn't want a husband, she wanted freedom. But what neither of them expected was that from the midst of pain, a flame would arise that even revenge couldn't extinguish. This is a story about two broken hearts, about choices that seemed hopeless, about a love born from the ashes and dared to bloom. Get ready to be moved, to be outraged, to sigh, and in the end perhaps believe again that even the most wounded souls can learn to love. If this story has already touched you, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications and leave a like. It helps us keep bringing stories that move and transform. And comment below, where are you listening to this story from? We want to know how far this love has reached. The silence of the night felt heavier in that small house in the Vermont countryside. The old clock on the wall barely managed to cover the sound of Isabella's rapidly beating heart. Sitting on the worn-out couch in the living room, she gripped her hands tightly in her lap, as though by intertwining her fingers she could hold back the fate that was drawing near. She was 25 years old, and no one had ever touched her. The house she grew up in was humble but full of love. Her father, a former teacher passionate about books, and her mother, a sweet and hard-working woman, always did their best to shield her from the pains of the world. But even the purest love couldn't protect her from the consequences of a desperate decision. Liam Montgomery. His name echoed in her mind like thunder, deep, frightening, unreachable. A man known for his empire, his difficult temper, and a coldness that froze any attempt at connection. A magnate, a titan, and starting that very night, her future husband. Isabella had discovered everything 3 days prior, by accident. She had overheard her parents arguing quietly in their room, voices muffled by guilt and shame. When she confronted them, the truth hit her like an unrelenting blizzard. Years ago, on the brink of bankruptcy, her parents had turned to Liam for a huge loan. He had helped, saved the house, paid off debts, and prevented the collapse. But the price came with an invisible bloodstain. Isabella. She would be his. There was no signed contract. No marriage proposal, not even a conversation. "It was the only way," her mother whispered, eyes brimming with tears. "You were just a girl, and he said he'd wait until you grew up." Isabella felt the ground disappear beneath her. Wait until she grew up, as if she were a promise, a living payment. And now, at 25, the collector had come knocking. The next morning, a black limousine parked in front of the house. 2 well-dressed security guards informed her that she would have 3 days to pack her things. After that, she would be taken to the Montgomery estate where the wedding would take place privately. No invitations, no party, no choice. During those days, she cried alone in her room. She couldn't sleep, barely ate, but she also didn't bow down. "If he thinks he can break me with fear, he's wrong," she murmured to herself in the mirror, wiping away the tears with the back of her hand. When the time came, Isabella was ready. She wore a simple white dress with long sleeves, no makeup. Her hair left loose as she had always preferred. Her suitcase was small. She packed only a few clothes, some books and a journal. No keepsakes. She only took what was necessary to remain who she was. The journey to the Montgomery mansion was silent. The car drove through New Hampshire's roads while she gazed out the window, watching the scenery change, from the grey city to the isolated green hills in the distance. Hours later, the iron gates opened to reveal a grand, imposing, cold estate. The stone mansion, surrounded by meticulously trimmed gardens, looked more like a castle abandoned by joy. No flowers, no sounds, no living soul in sight. Liam waited for her at the top of the marble staircase, dressed in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. Tall, with striking features and a steely gaze, he was the type of man who made the world spin around him, not by charm, but by sheer force. "Welcome," His voice was deep and controlled. She responded with her most valuable possession in that moment, determination. "Don't treat me as if I chose to be here." He raised an eyebrow as if observing a curious object. "I don't expect gratitude, only obedience." And so it all began. With cutting words, uncomfortable silences, and a cold ring placed on her finger by a private judge. With no kisses, no vows, no soul, Isabella became officially Mrs. Montgomery. But deep down she knew, nothing in that shiny ring could silence the voice inside her that screamed for justice, for freedom, for dignity. In the room assigned to her, larger than her entire old house, she sat on the edge of the bed and observed the space. Everything there seemed calculated: the dark furniture, the colorless mirrors, the heavy curtains blocking the sunlight. Even the air was thicker, as if the mansion itself breathed sadness. It was in that moment that the reality truly sank in. She was trapped. But she wasn't weak. If Liam thought money could buy everything, including a woman's heart, he was about to learn the opposite. Because inside that young virgin, fragile only on the outside, there was a strength waiting to be awakened. And what he thought was a convenient punishment could turn out to be the biggest turning point of his life. Right there, on that moonless night where the silence screamed louder than any words, Isabella swore to herself, "I may have been delivered as a debt, but my soul, no one can take it." And then, as she closed her eyes for the first time in that room that felt more like a cell, she heard, coming from somewhere upstairs, firm, heavy footsteps, marking their presence in the corridor. Was it him? The sound stopped in front of the door. She didn't move. But her heart. It had already started writing a story that no contract in the world could predict. The next morning arrived uninvited, tinting the sky with a dull grey that seemed to match the mood inside the Montgomery mansion. There were no flowers, no music, no smiles. Just a white dress hanging behind the door, and a decision that had already been made years ago, far from Isabella's consent. She woke up alone. The room was arranged as though no one had ever been there. Impeccable sheets, still air, closed curtains muffling any sign of life. It was as if time was suspended, as if the house didn't breathe until Liam said it could. Isabella looked at the dress. It was beautiful, simple in cut, elegant. But there was no poetry in that fabric. It was just a symbolic piece of a soulless ceremony. In the mirror she saw her own face, tired eyes, pale skin, lips pressed to prevent them from trembling. Still, there was a spark alight, a flicker of dignity that not even the previous night could extinguish. At exactly 10 o'clock, 2 maids gently knocked on the door. They entered with restrained steps, avoiding looking her in the eyes. They helped her dress, arranged her hair, and in silence led her through long, cold corridors to an empty room where only Liam, a hired judge, and 2 security guards waited. No flowers, no witnesses, no vows exchanged. The judge read the terms. Impersonal. Liam signed. Isabella, without uttering a single word, did the same. And so in less than 20 minutes, she became the official wife of one of the most feared and influential men in the country. "Consider this deal finalized," Liam said as he returned the pen to the table, not even looking at her. Isabella held his gaze, steady. "I'm not a contract. I'm a person." Liam didn't reply. He simply turned his back and left the room, leaving her there with her own anger, wrapped in a deafening silence. The next hours passed like a trance. A new key was handed to her, a golden key adorned with the Montgomery family crest, which would open her room. But the metaphor was cruel. The door could be opened, but freedom, that had remained outside the gates of the estate. When she entered the room again, now as a wife, Isabella found a box on the bed. Inside were documents, credit cards, a new phone, and a letter signed by Liam. "You will have everything you need. Don't bother me unless necessary. The rest of what is expected from us is just a facade. Do your part and I'll do mine. LM. Her stomach churned. A marriage of facade. A cold agreement. A theatre where they both had roles to play, her the obedient wife, him the magnanimous man who took on a debt. But Isabella wasn't born to be a background character in her own life. As she walked through the mansion in the following days, she realized just how isolated she was. The place was enormous, with wings that seemed to never end, but every step echoed alone like a cruel reminder of the distance between them, even under the same roof. Liam appeared little. When he did, it was brief, objective, harsh. There was an aura of control in every gesture of his, as if everything in the world needed to obey his will, even the way the wind blew through the windows. But no matter how hard he tried, there was one thing he couldn't manipulate: the silent, unwavering presence of Isabella. She refused to be shaped, even during the forced dinners, where they sat on opposite sides of a table that seemed miles apart. She made sure to look him in the eyes. She didn't look away, she didn't shrink. She replied with few words but with firmness, and this, almost imperceptibly, started to affect Liam. He wasn't used to this. Women usually bowed down. Accepted his terms, yielded. But Isabella didn't. She didn't shout, she didn't cry, she didn't beg, she simply resisted. With silence, with posture, with dignity. One night she decided not to show up for dinner. She shut herself in the room, opened the curtains for the first time, and let the moonlight in. She sat by the window in the armchair and wrote in her diary, "He wants an agreement. Fine. But my soul isn't for sale. I won't hate him. That would be giving. Him too much importance, but I won't make his life easier either." The next morning Liam stood at the door. "Why didn't you come down?" She, sitting at the table drinking coffee, replied slowly, "Because I'm not your employee, nor your prisoner." There was a moment of silence. He stared at her as if trying to decipher her. And for the first time he didn't respond coldly. He just sighed deeply and left. Something had changed in that moment. Something subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. Liam was beginning to realize that Isabella wasn't an object to be used and discarded. She was a challenge, a presence that didn't fade away with orders, a woman who, even without raising her voice, made the ground shake, and deep down he was beginning to respect that, even though he would never admit it. But what he still didn't know was that the woman, delivered as part of a debt, carried within her something he had lost long ago, the ability to feel. And that's exactly why, even though he tried to keep her at a distance, he began watching her more closely. In her gestures, her words, her silence, because sometimes what draws us the most is not what shouts but what resists in silence. The days following the wedding were marked by a suffocating routine where the mansion's luxury violently contrasted with the emotional void between its walls. Isabella, used to the simple sounds of life, the distant bark of a dog, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, the sound of someone knocking on the door, now lived in an almost clinical silence, where every step echoed with exaggerated force. As if she were being watched even by the old furniture. The mansion was beautiful, huge, impeccable, but it had no soul. Isabella walked through corridors filled with imported tapestries, windows framed by heavy curtains and expensive artworks. But the more she explored, the more she felt the weight of the absence of human warmth. There were no laughs, no photos, no past, just presence. A presence that smelled like loneliness. And at the center of it all, Liam. He kept a meticulously punctual routine, long meetings, international calls, nights in the office, and silent lunches. When their eyes met, it was as if invisible sparks ignited in the air. There was tension, but it was the kind of tension that burned, that provoked, a constant clash between two worlds that refused to bend. Liam had rules, and he wasn't the type of man who liked to see those rules being tested. In the first week, he made it clear: no going out without permission, no using the outside areas without supervision, no questioning how the house operates. Isabella just listened, arms crossed, eyes steady. "Are you giving me orders?" He looked at her as if she were an unexpected challenge. "I'm setting boundaries. You can hate me in silence, but you'll obey me. or what? There was a moment of thick silence, and then just an ironic smile at the corner of his mouth. You still don't understand how the world works, Isabella. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. But she understood something very clearly. This man was used to dominating environments, people, decisions, and Shiwei would be the exception. In the following days, she began to provoke small cracks in this structure of absolute control. She started using the gardens in the morning, even without permission. She read books in the library until late at night, even knowing that he slept early and hated lights being on. She began greeting the staff with kindness, something that visibly bothered Liam, who preferred that everyone stayed in the role of mere props in their own house. These small rebellions didn't go unnoticed, and it was on a Tuesday morning that the most direct clash occurred. Isabella, tired of feeling like a shadow in a soulless castle, decided to sunbathe by the pool. She put on a red swimsuit she had brought from home, the only piece of clothing that held any personal touch, and spread a towel on the lounger. Her hair loose, her eyes closed, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel the warmth of the sun on her skin like a caress of freedom. But the peace lasted only a moment. The sound of the glass doors opening abruptly was followed by the firm sound of his footsteps. "What do you think you're doing?" Liam's voice cut through the air like a blade. Isabella slowly opened her eyes without getting up. "Sunbathing. I'm at home, aren't I?" "Put something decent on," he growled, approaching. "You're not here to show off to the staff." She stood up calmly, not breaking eye contact. "So that's what you think of me? That I'm showing off? You know exactly what you're doing. And you know exactly how much you're trying to control me." Liam moved even closer, his eyes burning. "I'm the one in charge of this house, and you're here on my terms." "I'm not your thing, Liam." Her voice was firm but quiet. "You may have bought my presence, but not my dignity." Silence fell between them like a bomb. And before he could say anything, Isabella passed by him, grabbed her towel and walked back inside, leaving drops of water and tension behind. That night, the house felt even more oppressive. Isabella tried to sleep, but the air was heavy. She got up, went to the balcony of her room and stared at the dark sky. Down below the mansion's gates. There, right there was a world free from the other side. A world where she wasn't an agreement, but a whole woman. Without thinking twice, she silently descended the stairs barefoot, her heart pounding. She walked to the main gate. She reached for the latch, thinking of running away. Liam's voice came like thunder from behind her. She turned slowly, breathless. Thinking of breathing, he watched her for a long time. No irony, no anger, just with a gaze that mixed fatigue with something she couldn't decipher. "You have no idea what you're provoking," he finally said, and walked away. She stood there, alone, but whole, her eyes fixed on the gates, knowing that even if she couldn't cross them, something inside her had already crossed an invisible line, and there was no turning back. It was like living in a minefield. Every movement Isabella made was a subtle provocation. Every choice, even the simplest, like what to wear or where to walk, seemed to ignite an invisible fuse inside Liam. And despite the silent fear trying to settle in her chest, there was something stronger, the certainty that she wouldn't be tamed. On the morning everything fell apart. The sky was clear, and the air surprisingly warm for the season. Isabella woke up with an unease in her chest. She wanted to breathe, feel life move through her body. After so many days being treated like a shadow inside a golden mansion, she needed to remind herself that she was still alive. She put on a simple black swimsuit with thin straps, discreet yet flattering her curves. She covered herself with a light robe and slowly walked down, descending the stairs in silence. The sun outside beat down hard on the light stones of the garden, and the pool's gleam seemed inviting. She walked to a lounge chair and settled. In letting the robe slip off to the side, she closed her eyes. For a few moments she forgot everything. The forced marriage, Liam's name, his cold eyes. There, under the sun, she was just Isabella. A woman, a body, a fleeting breath of temporary freedom. But reality didn't take long to interrupt those brief moments of peace. The sharp sound of the sliding door being thrown open violently made her heart race. When she opened her eyes, she saw Liam standing at the door of the glass room. His jaw clenched, his gaze dark. He walked toward her like a controlled hurricane, but one on the verge of breaking loose. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a venomous restraint. "Sunbathing." "Is that forbidden now?" "Put something on," Gauzy answered between clenched teeth. "I don't want the gardeners looking at you like—" "Like what?" She stood up suddenly, her body tense. "Like I'm a woman, not a possession, Liam?" Came closer, threatening. "Don't you dare challenge me up. I would dare 1,000 times if it means keeping my dignity." She was trembling but not backing down. "If you're bothered by my body, look away. Or is it that you're bothered because you can't pretend anymore that it doesn't attract you?" The air between them snapped like an exposed electric wire. He took a deep breath, visibly restraining himself. But instead of responding, he grabbed her arm firmly, not hurting her but making it clear he wasn't joking. "Go back inside. Now." "Take your hands off me, Liam," she whispered. "You want to control everything because you're afraid of losing control of yourself. But I'm not your punishment, and I won't accept being treated as one." For a second, his gaze wavered. There was something there. Pain, anger, desire. Maybe all of it at once that he couldn't hide anymore. But he didn't say anything. He simply released her arm abruptly and walked away, his footsteps heavy on the stone floor. Isabella stood there, alone, her chest heaving, her face flushed, not just from the sun, but from the adrenaline. Hours later, as dusk settled, she still felt the bitter taste of the argument. She was tired, exhausted. She decided to walk through the house as she did whenever she wanted to think. She passed by the library, the empty studio on the second floor, until she reached the back door. That led to the road. She stopped. The iron doorknob felt heavy, but her decision was light. She was going to run away. She put on a coat over her pajamas and left slowly. The garden was empty. The night was falling slowly, and she felt her heart pounding in her throat. She walked to the main gate. It was locked as always, but this time she had the key. One of the security guards had left it on the entry table, a mistake or fate. With trembling hands she inserted the key into the gate, turned. Nothing. She tried again. The latch creaked. She was seconds away from freedom when she heard a sound behind her. Footsteps. She turned around. Liam was there, standing, his eyes locked. On hers, breathing heavily as if he had been running. "You're not leaving, and why not?" "Are you going to lock me up?" "I don't need to," he answered, quieter than she expected. "Because if you leave now, you won't hear what I have to say." She froze. He took a step forward. "I went to your room. I saw you weren't there. And," he hesitated, "I realized it wasn't the gate that scared me. It was the idea of you really crossing it. Of never coming back." Isabella held her breath. "Say what you have to say," she whispered. Liam moved closer until he was just a few inches away from her, his tired face, his vulnerable gaze. "I'm lost, Isabella. And you're making me feel things I swore I'd never allow again. But if you want to leave, I won't stop you." She bit her lip, trying to hold back the emotions threatening to spill over. She looked at the key in her hand, then at his eyes, and without saying a word, she dropped the key to the ground, but not out of surrender, out of something new that she didn't yet know how to name. That night didn't end like the others. After the near confrontation at the gate, Isabella returned to her room feeling the weight of something she didn't yet know how to name. It wasn't fear, it wasn't relief either. It was as if a crack had opened inside Liam, and even though she didn't understand what was there, she couldn't ignore what she had seen. He didn't stop her from leaving. He didn't yell. He didn't order her to be locked away. He just stopped, and for the first time he exposed a crack in the steel shield he wore on his chest, but still the silence between them remained. In the days that followed, Liam seemed even more reserved. He spent hours locked in his office, left early, came back late, and avoided crossing paths with her. Isabella, for her part, immersed herself in her own thoughts. Something was changing, that much was clear. But changing didn't. mean understanding. And understanding in this case was necessary. It was then, on a cold afternoon, while walking down the back corridor, that she overheard voices coming from the kitchen. Two maids were talking quietly, thinking no one was listening. Never got over her death. Emma? Yeah. They say it was horrible, and the worst part was caused by the parents of his new wife. Isabella froze, her breath caught in her chest. She stepped back, leaning against the wall, and waited for the voices to fade. Emma. That was the missing piece. She had heard that name before, whispered by one of the staff over the phone. Something about Mr. Montgomery's mourning. But now, everything started to make sense. The name Emma sounded like a ghost haunting the mansion's halls. What if Liam's past was directly tied to her? Isabella needed to know. That night, she went to the library. She discreetly rummaged through a drawer in the old cabinet that seemed never to have been touched. There were folders, newspapers, documents, and a locked wooden box. Beside it, a thin metal key. She hesitated, but then opened it. Inside there were old photos, a younger Liam smiling, hugging a woman with brown hair and intense eyes. Isabella's heart tightened. She was beautiful. She had a lively gaze, a strong expression, almost like Isabella's when she still had light dreams and nights filled with laughter. There were also newspaper clippings. One, yellowed by time, had the headline, "Snowy Road Accident." Claims the life of Emma Caldwell, 26. Those responsible were intoxicated. Isabella read the text once, twice, 3 times, and when she finally understood, her hands began to tremble. The ones responsible were her parents. The realization hit with the weight of a silent earthquake. The loan, the agreement, Liam's coldness, everything made sense. She wasn't just a debt. She was part of the revenge, the marriage, the disdain, his indifference. It was retaliation, punishment, a silent and cruel settling of scores with the past. She couldn't breathe. She sat on the floor, the clippings still in her hands, trying to process it all. The puzzle pieces were all there, and they hurt like blades. Later that night, with red eyes and a heart laid bare, Isabella knocked on his office door. Liam answered with a closed expression, but as soon as he saw her standing there with the clippings in her hand, his face paled. I found out he didn't respond. Emma died because of my parents, and you wanted me as payment for that. The silence was deafening. You used me as a symbol of the pain you carry, as if my body could heal your soul, as if seeing me here trapped could return what you lost. It's not just that, he murmured finally, looking away. But yes, I wanted them to pay. And you were the only link left. Isabella felt her eyes well up, but she didn't cry. She was beyond tears. Nothing you do to me will bring Emma back. These words, said with such firmness, hit Liam like an invisible punch. He took a step back, as if out of breath. The pain he had hidden for so long had finally found a way out. And what she saw there behind the relentless man was only a broken man. I know, he replied at last, but I didn't know how to live without carrying the pain. The anger gave me a purpose, and when your parents came to me with that desperate plea, I accepted, not because I needed the money, but because I needed the feeling that I had some control over all of it. Isabella lowered her gaze. And now? Liam stepped closer, his voice hoarse, heavy. Now I don't know, because for the first time I see you, and I don't see revenge. I see something that scares me far more. She raised her face. Like what? He hesitated, but he didn't. Say? He simply stood there in silence, staring at a woman who was no longer just a symbol of the past, but a living presence that challenged everything he thought he knew about pain, guilt, and love. That night the house was silent, a thick, heavy silence that seemed to hear everything. Isabella felt the weight of the recent revelations like a suffocating cloak on her shoulders. What had once been just an imposed marriage now revealed a much crueler layer. She had been used as a weapon, a living reminder of the woman Liam had loved and lost, a trophy of pain. And yet, Something inside her prevented her from giving in to complete hatred. Anger was there, yes, but there was something else, a feeling disguised as compassion, a silent echo of his pain that, no matter how much she tried to deny it, touched parts of her that still believed that even the most wounded hearts can relearn to feel. Later, Isabella found him in the library, sitting in the leather armchair, his hands resting on his knees, as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He seemed smaller, not in stature but in presence, as if at last the weight of what he had done was becoming visible, even to him. She entered without knocking. "You took revenge on the wrong person," she said, her voice firm but low. "I never harmed anyone. I was 7 when Emma died." Liam didn't answer right away. He slowly raised his gaze. His eyes, once so hard, now seemed tired, empty. "I know," he murmured. "And still you tied me to this life," she continued without lowering her tone. "You took my freedom, my dreams, for something I didn't even remember. You used me as punishment for wounds that weren't mine." He sighed, running, a hand through his hair. The silence stretched for a few seconds that felt like hours. "Emma was everything," he finally said. "My refuge, my peace, the only place where I felt the world made sense, and when she left, I broke inside. The world lost its meaning, and I needed to find someone to blame." "So you found." "My parents barred," she said, stepping closer, "and thought taking me as yours would be a way of making justice." He didn't respond. He just looked at her, and in that gaze there was raw pain, no filters. "I didn't plan on hating you. But when you arrived, so much like her, so alive, I wanted to erase that." Isabella took a deep breath, her chest tight. "But you couldn't, could you?" Liam closed his eyes for a moment, as if her words pierced him. "Because every time you face me, Isabella, every time you don't bow down, that look in your eyes without fear, I see myself disarmed, and that weakens me more than any memory of Emma." She stopped in front of him, looking down, her hands clenched at her sides. "Maybe what you call weakness is just the beginning of your healing." He raised his face, surprised by her words. "I don't want to heal you," he whispered. "It's not your responsibility. I just want you to know, that what you've done to me won't break me." And then, in an impulse she couldn't explain, she knelt until she was at his height. Her hands touched his, for the first time without anger, without fear, without bitterness. "I'm not leaving," she said. "Not yet, because I need to understand who you are, without all this pain covering your skin." Liam's breathing quickened. He didn't pull away from her touch. Instead, he held her hands tightly, like holding on to something he feared losing. "You have no idea what you're saying, Isabella." "I do. I'm saying that despite everything, I still see you, and that scares me. But it also gives me hope." The silence between them was broken only by the distant sound of thunder. The rain, which had been threatening to fall for days, finally began to tap on the windows, a soft rhythmic sound like a whisper from afar. The house, once so dry and still, seemed to breathe with them. Liam stood up, pulling her by the hand, not with force, but with something closer to desperation. His eyes were brimming with tears. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "Maybe not, but no one deserves to live trapped in their past forever." He pulled her into an embrace. For the first time, an unplanned gesture, not programmed, an embrace without seduction, without domination, just pain, exhaustion, and a touch of redemption. Her face pressed against his chest, the sound of his heart racing, the smell of his shirt, all real. "And terrifyingly new. If you want to hate me," Ferrari murmured, "I'll understand." She closed her eyes. "I don't want to hate anyone. I just want to stop feeling invisible." And there, in that moment where two broken hearts met without shields, without masks, without games, something changed. Maybe it wasn't love yet, but it was the end of hate, and for both of them, that was already a beginning. The atmosphere inside the mansion had changed, almost imperceptibly, but it had changed. The rigidity from before gave way to longer pauses in the silences, to glances that didn't immediately look away, to small gestures that seemed to say more than any words. Liam no longer stormed through the halls like an impenetrable hurricane, and Isabella, though still cautious, was beginning to let some of the walls she had built inside herself start to fall. That morning, the gentle aroma of fresh coffee filled the corridors, and Isabella felt a strange sense of peace as she walked through the kitchen alone. The maids had left early to handle something in the city, and she had volunteered to make her own breakfast, a simple habit that, until then, had been denied to her in a house where everything was ready, calculated, distant. With her hair tied up carelessly in a shirt far too big, she looked like an ordinary woman, and that was exactly how Liam found her when he crossed the kitchen door. "You cooking?" he murmured with a crooked smile. She didn't even turn around. "Don't worry, I'm not planning on poisoning your coffee. Not yet." "That's a relief," he said, approaching lighter than usual. "Need any help?" She glanced over her shoulder, a contained smile on her lips. "Do you know how to do anything other than sign contracts and control everything around you?" He smiled, surprised by the challenge. You'd be surprised. The kitchen, once so impersonal, filled with a different kind of energy. Liam pulled up one of the stools and watched as she stirred the coffee and prepared the toast. For a moment they seemed like a couple, a common couple, on a common morning. But the calm was interrupted by a small accident. Isabella, distracted, tried to reach a heavy pot that was on the top shelf. She stood on her toes, stretching her body as far as she could, but when she managed to touch the handle, she lost her balance. The pot fell with a crash, and in the instinctive motion she slipped and hit her back hard on the sharp edge of the marble counter. "Ouch!" she shouted, bringing her hand to her lower back. Liam jumped up and rushed to her. "Are you okay?" She was breathing heavily, her eyes squeezed shut from the pain. "I think I hurt here." She pointed to the side of her back, just above her hip. He helped her sit down slowly on the nearest chair. "Let me see," he said, his voice quieter but firm. "No need, I can manage." "Isabella," he interrupted gently. "Please." She hesitated but turned to the side, lifting her shirt slightly to expose the bruised skin. The mark was already turning red, with shades promising a deep purple. In the next few hours, Liam grabbed some ointment from the drawer beside him. He sat behind her, and with slow, careful movements, he began to apply the cream to the sensitive area. His touch was soft, respectful, almost hesitant. Time seemed to stop. The silence that formed between them was no longer the same as before. It was a silence full of unspoken things, full of attention, care, of something growing slowly as if it didn't want to scare them. Isabella closed her eyes. For the first time, his touch wasn't a demand, but a kindness. For the first time, she didn't want to run away. "Have you always been like this?" she asked, her voice soft. "Like what?" "So hard on the outside, but with hands so gentle." He smiled, but the smile was sad. "It's been so long I don't even know who I really am anymore." She turned a little, staring at him. "Maybe it's time to remember." His eyes met hers. For a moment the world seemed to fit in that gaze. There were no games, no pain, no heavy memories, just the presence of two bodies that, little by little, were recognizing each other amid the chaos. Liam lowered his gaze and took a deep breath. "You have no idea what you've been doing to me since you arrived." "Maybe I do," she replied, her voice still soft. His touch was still on her skin, but now more than physical, it was something internal, as if by caring for her he was also trying to care for himself. He stood up, calmly. "Rest. I'll ask them to bring some ice." She nodded, but before he left the kitchen, Isabella called him Liam. He turned. "Thank you." It was a simple word, but said there at that moment, it felt like a silent gesture of reconciliation between two worlds that were beginning to meet. He didn't answer, but he smiled. And that smile was a promise he didn't yet know how to fulfill. The night arrived without haste that day, as if time itself knew something was about to happen. The lights in the mansion were softer than usual, and the wind that blew through the partially open windows carried a light scent of wet earth and old leaves. Isabella lay on her side in the bed, her body still sore from the fall. But what truly kept her from sleeping wasn't the physical pain. It was what had been happening in the past few days, or perhaps in the past few hours. It was the careful touch of Liam, the eyes that looked at her without hatred, the silence that wasn't cruel but full of contained tenderness. She didn't want to fool herself. She didn't want to confuse fragility with affection, kindness with love. But what she felt that morning, when he took care of her back with such delicacy, was something she could no longer ignore. It wasn't just the warmth of his hands on her skin, it was what those hands were trying to say. Hours later, with the house asleep, she heard his footsteps in the hallway, a sound she had learned to identify above all others. Slow, heavy, laden with unspoken intentions. The doorknob turned gently. He didn't enter immediately. "Are you awake?" "Yes," she answered, without hesitation. Liam entered and carefully closed the door. He was wearing a white shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, his hair slightly disheveled, as if he too had spent hours battling thoughts that didn't know where to go. Isabella sat up slowly. "Did you come to check on me?" "That too, but not just for that." She watched him approach. His eyes were different, still intense but less hardened. They carried a vulnerability that made him even more of a man, and less of a machine. "I tried to hate you," he confessed, standing in front of her. "I tried to convince myself this marriage was just a form of justice, but it's not that anymore." "And what is it now?" she asked, her voice almost whispered. He kneeled in front of her, took her hands, and kissed them slowly. His lips touched her skin as if asking for forgiveness for everything that had remained unsaid. "It's the first time in years I don't feel alone." Isabella breathed deeply. Those words, so simple, hit her chest like a storm. There were no declarations of love, no impossible promises, just a real confession, and she, still wounded, couldn't ignore what she felt. She ran her fingers through his hair. "I'm also tired of resisting." He looked into her eyes, searching for confirmation. That didn't come in words, but it wasn't necessary. The kiss started like this, slow, full of hesitation and surrender at the same time, as if they both knew they were stepping into sacred territory. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't dominating. It was intimate, real. A kiss that asked for permission with the lips and offered shelter with the hands. Liam gently laid her down, avoiding the bruised part of her back. His touch was different from everything she had imagined. There was no dominance but devotion, as if every inch of skin touched was a way to thank her for still being there, for still trusting, even after everything. Isabella, in turn, didn't feel fear. She felt desire. She felt the need to surrender, not as payment, but as a choice. For the first time, it was her decision, and her body said yes before the words did. The clothes came off carefully, their breath intertwined, eyes never strayed. It was a dance with no rush, where every movement said, "I see you." In that room, on that bed that had once been so cold, their bodies met not only as a man and a woman, but as two survivors, two souls carrying scars, who had fears, but who, in that moment, chose to leave the fear outside. It was a night of intense pleasure, but it wasn't just physical. It was filled with emotion, with a silence that screamed, with touches that confessed everything the lips hadn't dared to say. Liam explored her body like someone discovering unfamiliar territory. Isabella, in turn, felt alive, whole, desired not out of obligation, but for who she was. When the climax came, it wasn't just a carnal peak. It was a kind of liberation, from burdens, from guilt, from defenses. Afterward, they stayed wrapped in each other's arms, his body fitting against hers like an unspoken promise. The silence returned, but now it was comforting. Isabella rested her head on his chest. "Does this change everything?" Liam took a while to answer. "I don't know, but I think it changes enough for us to start a new story." She closed her eyes and, for the first time since entering that house, She slept in peace. The days following that night were wrapped in a different kind of silence, a silence that didn't weigh down, but gently embraced. Liam and Isabella began to cross paths in the house with softer glances, almost conspiratorial. They didn't talk about what had happened, but they didn't pretend it hadn't. It was as if they had silently made a pact of a new beginning, still uncertain, still fragile. Isabella woke up with a lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. The hallways seemed less cold, the curtains less heavy. Even the wall clock, once oppressive, now marked time with more delicacy. But along with this breeze of novelty came something unexpected, the nausea. On the first day, she thought it was nerves. On the second, she blamed breakfast, but by the third day, when she could barely get out of bed, the doubt turned into suspicion. Her body was different. Her skin more sensitive, her senses more heightened, and an intuition, one of those that grow deep within the chest, began to quietly grow. That afternoon, she went out alone to the town, with Liam's permission, which now didn't come with the same strict control as before. She stopped by a small pharmacy in the center of Concord, bought 2 tests, and returned home with her hands trembling inside her coat. She took the first test quickly, holding her breath. The second, with tears in her eyes even before looking at the result. 2 lines. 2. Isabella sat on the bathroom floor, leaning against the cold marble wall, and let the tears fall, not knowing exactly what she was feeling. Was it joy? Was it fear? Was it the confirmation that something inside her had changed forever? She placed her hand on her belly as if, with this gesture, she could calm everything that was stirring inside. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, as if saying the words to convince herself. But she knew. She had known since the morning before, when she felt a strange warmth spread through her body as she looked at the garden. She had known since Liam touched her so carefully, as if touching something precious. She knew that in the body that had once been used as currency, there was now something no one could control. A new life. She spent the rest of the day in silence, thoughtful. She walked around the house with her hand resting on her belly, absorbing this new reality like someone trying to grasp a miracle. But the hardest part was still ahead, telling him. That night, she found Liam in the office. He was reading through some contract as usual, but there was something in his demeanor that showed he was different too. Less tense, less grey. She stood at the door for a few seconds, watching him. Then, she took a deep breath. "Can we talk?" He looked up immediately. "Of course," he replied, closing the file and standing up. "Is something wrong?" She walked toward him slowly, her heart pounding like a drum in her throat. When she was face to face with him, she took his hand. It was the first time she did so without hesitation. "Liam, I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was absolute. His eyes searched hers, as if needing confirmation that he had heard correctly. "You are sure?" She simply nodded and took out the folded paper with the result. He took it with trembling hands, read it slowly, then raised his eyes. But what she saw there wasn't anger. Not shock, not coldness. It was emotion, pure raw. He took 2 steps back as if he needed air, ran his hands through his hair, then over his face. And then he smiled. A small, restrained smile, but one Isabella had never seen before. A smile that held no mask. It was the smile of someone who, after a long time, felt something real. A child. He whispered almost to himself. She bit her lip, trying to hold back the tears. "I thought you'd reject it. That you'd see this as a problem." He approached again and with an almost improbable gentleness placed his hand on her belly. The gesture surprised him as much as it did her. It was as if, in that touch, he had found a new reason to exist. "This isn't a problem, Isabella. This is a chance." She raised her eyebrows. "A chance to do things differently, to not be the man I've been until now, to not repeat the pain, to build something new with you." The tears she had been holding back began to fall silently. Liam hugged her. And in that hug there was something that had never existed between them before. Surrender. He kissed the top of her head. I promise. I'll take care of you both. I won't hide behind guilt anymore. I don't want to lose this. She rested, her face on his chest, hearing the sound of a heart that now beat not only for him but for three. In that moment, the revenge dissolved completely. The hurt, though still there, lost its prominence. And in its place, something stronger was born, something that couldn't be explained in words but grew in silence, in the womb, in the gaze, the beginning of a new story. The news of the pregnancy was like a ray of light entering through a crack no one expected. But unlike fairy tales, real life doesn't turn into paradise instantly just because a baby is on the way. Love, when born from barren lands, needs time to take root. It needs care, effort, and above all, forgiveness. In the days following the revelation, the house seemed more alive, not because of visible changes, but through the small signs. Liam, for example, started waking up earlier to have breakfast with Isabella, even if it was in silence, sometimes just watching her slowly sip the chamomile tea that had replaced coffee due to her nausea. Other times, asking about what she was reading or offering a blanket on the colder days. Isabella accepted these gestures, but she didn't forget the past. Inside her, something still hurt, and with the silent growth of the new life in her belly came an almost urgent need to rebuild, not just the present, but everything that had been destroyed before. She knew she couldn't be a mother carrying hidden grudges, but she also knew that forgiveness isn't something handed over on a silver platter. It's earned day by day. It was on a grey afternoon, while the rain fell lightly over the mansion's gardens, that Isabella finally said what she had been holding back. They were sitting on the porch, covered in blankets. She absent-mindedly caressed her belly when she looked at him. Have you forgiven yourself? Liam turned his face, confused. For everything, she continued. For Emma, for me, for yourself. He took a deep breath, his gaze lost in the wet landscape. Sometimes I think I have, but other times it feels like I'm still that man blinded by anger, like I deserve to live carrying this guilt. Isabella watched him closely. You don't have to punish yourself to keep her memory alive. But what if... He hesitated. What if I forget? She smiled gently. Loving someone isn't holding on to the pain. It's holding on to what was good. The Emma you loved still lives inside you, but she doesn't need to stop you from living another story. Liam lowered his gaze. And what about you? Can you forgive me? The question lingered between them for long seconds. Isabella took her time to answer, and when she did, her voice was calm but firm. Not yet, but I'm trying. Because I don't want our child to be born in an environment where the past dictates the rules. I want them to see love, respect, truth. He nodded in silence. From that conversation, everything began to change, not with explosions, but with consistency. Liam started attending the medical appointments. He accompanied Isabella on walks through the garden. He brought books about pregnancy. He personally installed a rocking chair in the adjacent room, which was beginning to transform into a cozy space for the baby. Isabella, in turn, began to open up to affection. She let him hug her. She touched his hand more often, and, every now and then, she smiled for real. But the true turning point came one unexpected night. They were in the library, he reading in silence, she scribbling possible names in an old notebook. That's when, out of nowhere, she said, I remember the night I almost ran away, and the way you looked at me when you found me at the gate. Liam raised his eyes, attentive. That night I saw the man you really are. Lost, yes, but afraid of losing someone again. He remained silent. And I wanted you to know, she continued, that night I decided to stay, not because I felt trapped, but because, for the first time, I felt like maybe I was free inside here, with you. He swallowed hard. Isabella. Shh, she interrupted, smiling. You don't need to say anything yet. Just keep being that man. the one who puts ice on my back, who listens to me without defending himself, the one who cares even in silence. And one day maybe I'll look at you and say I've forgiven you, and that I love you in the same sentence." Liam closed his eyes for a second, as if engraving those words in his chest. The reconstruction wasn't perfect. There were days of doubt, moments of harder silence, relapses into the old instinct of control. But now there was also a real desire to do things differently, a desire from both of them, and that was enough. The next month, the house received its first visitors in years. Isabella's parents, who came to see their pregnant daughter, and mostly to face the man to whom they had delivered their only daughter, as if she were a signed piece of paper. The conversation was difficult, painful, but necessary. And in the end, between tears, hesitant hugs, and muffled apologies, Isabella understood something that would forever change her relationship with the past. Sometimes, those who hurt us the most were also trying to survive. And forgiving in the end wasn't saying that everything was fine. It was saying that it would no longer control us. That night, Isabella wrote in her diary, "We're far from perfect, but for the first time, I feel like we're heading in the right direction, and that's love in the making." 3 years had passed since that silent night, when Isabella held a pregnancy test with trembling hands, believing that the result would change her life forever. And it did. But not just because of the arrival of Lucas, the baby who now ran barefoot through the same halls of the mansion that once felt more like a tomb. It changed because she and Liam didn't just build a new family, they rebuilt themselves. The garden, once cold and ornamental, was now a sanctuary of life. Colorful flowers filled the flower beds, children's toys were scattered across the lawn, and laughter echoed through the trees. The place that had once symbolized pain and imprisonment was now the stage for a child's laughter. And for Isabella, that was the true miracle. She walked barefoot among the sunflowers they had planted together, watching Lucas chase a butterfly, his dark hair messy, his cheeks flushed, so small, and yet already able to light up everything around him. Liam, in turn, watched the scene from the porch. He held a book in his hand, but his eyes were fixed on them, his wife and his son. And every time he watched them like this, unseen, a warmth in his chest still surprised him. He had changed. Slowly, painfully, but he had changed. The man who once lived for control, for revenge, and for coldness, now knew how to make breakfast, knew how to tell bedtime stories, knew how to listen without pushing back, and, perhaps the hardest of all, knew how to apologize when he was wrong. There were still difficult days. Liam was human. Sometimes he fell back into old habits, into impulses of isolation, into a silence that hurt. But now, he knew how to come back. He knew how to say, "I love you," with his eyes, even when his mouth remained silent. That morning, in particular, Isabella entered the porch holding Lucas in her arms. He was asleep, exhausted after so much playing, his little head resting on her shoulder as if it were his favorite place in the world. Liam stood up and helped her settle the boy on the couch. "He's growing so fast," he murmured, watching their son sleep. Isabella smiled. "And he took after your temperament." "That scares me," he said with a half-smile, half-proud. She looked at him, then gently ran her fingers through his hair. "You don't have to be afraid of being a father. You're doing much better than you think." He took her hand and kissed it tenderly. The gesture was repeated almost every day, like an intimate ritual that never grew old. "And you, Isabella, are the best thing that's ever happened to me," she laughed softly. "And to think it all started with an absurd debt." "Don't remind me," he joked, pressing his forehead against hers. "Sometimes I wonder how you managed to put up with me." She calmly caressed his face. "Maybe because deep down I always knew that the man behind that armor was worth it." He sighed, closing his eyes for a moment. "You saved me." She didn't answer. She just smiled. Because she knew that. Despite everything they had been through, no words were truer than that one. The Montgomery mansion was no longer a luxury prison. It was home, with the smell of bread baking in the oven, Fingerprints on the windows, toys scattered on the stairs, and unexpected smiles during dinner. The room where Isabella once felt captive was now the place where she read bedtime stories, where she spread clothes over the bed, where she cried from emotion seeing Liam lying with Lucas in his arms, singing lullabies with a soft and off-key voice. That home had been built on ruins, but ruins can also be foundations if there is courage, and they had it. One night, lying beside him, Isabella wrote in her diary, "Our love was born from the ashes. It was nourished by tears, silences, and inner struggles, but it blossomed. And today I see the truest things in life don't come ready-made. They are built, one gesture at a time, one choice at a time." She closed the notebook and put it in the drawer as she always did. Liam approached from behind and hugged her, resting his face in the curve of her neck. "I love you, Isabella." "I know," she replied with a calm smile. "Do you love me too?" She turned her face and kissed him slowly, more than you can imagine. Outside, Lucas slept, and the night fell over the mansion, no longer as a burden, but as a soft, welcoming cloak, signaling that the times of pain were behind them. They had been broken, yes, but they were rebuilt together, and now they had not just a home, they had each other, they had love. Perhaps the truest love isn't the one that begins with promises, but the one that withstands the weight of the past, the one that chooses to stay even after seeing all the scars. Isabella was given as part of a debt. Liam, for years, lived, fueled by revenge. But in the midst of the chaos came a child, and with it the chance to rewrite the story. Now I ask you, do you believe love can be born where there was once only pain? Would you forgive someone who destroyed your freedom? If they learned to truly love you, share with us in the comments, where are you listening to this story from? And what would you do if you were in Isabella's place? If this story touched your heart, leave a like. It helps us grow and bring more intense narratives like this. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss any chapters of the upcoming stories. And who knows, share it with someone who still believes love can be born in the most unlikely places.